And welcome everybody. It's good to have you all here on this gloomy early March day to talk about conifers. And we had a tremendous amount of interest in this program. We had a lot of people signed up. I think we had like over 80 people register for the program, which is fantastic. And I don't know, I can't really see how many people we have exactly in here, but it's really great that we had that much interest in conifers. So very excited to give this presentation today. I've wanted to give a presentation about conifers for a long time. They're an amazing group of plants. I'm very passionate about them. I've had a lot of coniferous experiences and have taken a lot of photos and traveled and seen collections and plants in the wild. So I'm excited to share that with you today. Conifers are a very extensive group of trees. So this presentation could have gone a lot of different directions. I knew I wanted to make it good for someone who is just starting to learn conifers, but also enjoyable for someone who is a conifer connoisseur, a collector, and a grower. So I wanted it to make it good for everybody. Um, and I think Crazy World of Conifers is a good title for this because when trying to, brainstorm and come up with ideas of what I wanted this presentation to be, I knew I wasn't going to get to every conifer, every fact, every detail, every anecdote. So I kind of just let my mind race and just kind of put out what seemed appropriate. So you'll see by the tone and the nature of this presentation that I think the crazy world of conifers is a good way to put it. Um, I used to get nervous for things like this, but then I always kind of just lean back and tell myself, it's just plants. It's just plants. So we're just going to enjoy ourselves and we're going to talk plants today. All right. So what better way to get in the right mindset for a presentation about conifers than to visit a world-class conifer collection? So earlier today, a couple of my colleagues and I went up to the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University and walked around. And we were there to see not just conifers, but a lot of the witch hazels right now are in bloom. So we certainly smelled our fair share of witch hazels, but we also went to the famous conifer collections there. You can see the weeping hemlock in the top left corner of your screen, and the newest member of our team, Abby, standing with a conifer she's very passionate about. That is the Hazel Smith giant sequoia, I believe. Beautiful pyramidal form. So this was a fun trip we did today, and a great way for me to kind of get my mind ready to talk about conifers for an hour and 15 minutes. So, what is a conifer? I promise there aren't too many slides that look like they belong in a science class lecture. A conifer is a woody plant, a tree, shrub, or creeping ground cover that bears pollen cones and female seed cones. Conifers are gymnosperms. We all often talk about the gymnosperms and the angiosperms being the flowering plants. Um, uh, Male and female pollen cone or male and female cones on the same tree. All conifers that I know of produce both female seed cones and male pollen cones. So we'd call that a plant that produces both male and female flowers, reproductive structures, a monoecious plant. And all conifers are wind pollinated, and wind aids in seed dispersal. Um, a lot of these plants are more primitive. They evolved before a lot of the insects that do a lot of the pollinating. So wind is a great help in that. They have worldwide distribution. They are found on every continent except Antarctica. Too cold there. And a lot of estimates count around like 600 to 650 species of conifers worldwide. I would imagine with plant discoveries that have yet to happen, we're probably looking at probably around closer to 700 species, covering 70 genera. And of course, there is countless cultivated varieties that we grow in our gardens. Crazy cones. So a lot of people associate conifers with cones, of course. And cones come in all different shapes and sizes, colors. On the top left, you can see that is a European cypress, and that is a rounded or a globose cone. Um, Oftentimes, cones might be cylindrical, like these adorable little Tsuga canadensis. or the eastern hemlock in the bottom left corner of your screen. Most cones will hang from the branches of a tree, but not all of them. In the top right, you can see the fir, which has its cones kind of suspended towards the top of the tree on top of the branches. And many cones, especially pines, some species have on the cone scales have like spiky protrusions that I would imagine are an adaptation to keep animals from getting at the cones before they're ready to release their seeds. And all cones, will kind of be usually a bright color as they're developing. They may take 1 or 2 years to develop, and then they will dehisce, crack open, and release their seeds. And what's interesting is as a conifer gets older and larger, female cone production or seed cone production will move up the crown of the tree. And I always like to quiz people on why they think that might be. Of course, we go back to how conifers are pollinated by the wind. And of course, if your cones are up higher on the plant, you're going to have better airflow and making for easier pollination. So yeah, we have seed cones, of course, but we also have male pollen producing cones, which are interesting in their own right. You can see in the top left, that is an Austrian pine, and its pollen cones open to release pollen in the spring. Bottom left corner of your screen is the blue Atlas cedar, and that releases its pollen in the fall. And very interesting, top right, you have what is a male pollen cone and a seed-bearing cone fused into one structure. So essentially a hermaphroditic cone. And I spotted this on a plant at the Arnold Arboretum in, I believe, 2023, and it was a spruce tree. I'm forgetting what species it was. I do have the photograph somewhere. But I would imagine that this cone probably didn't bear seed because usually the male pollen cones will fall away after they release their pollen. So I'm sure that fell away before it was able to develop seed. And then, of course, when the seed-bearing cones first open, a lot of times they're very showy, very colorful, and that is especially true with the larches. I know Abby today was very excited about the larches and seeing and getting ready for when their seed cones first emerge. They might be different shades of red and pink, and you can see when the pollen is released, it floats through the air and glides right into these little compartments to achieve fertilization. So keep your eyes out for cones as they first emerge, not only seed cones, but male pollen cones. And the technical name for a pollen cone is a strobili. So this is the last slide that looks like a uh, science class presentation, but I think it's helpful because when I was first learning conifers, um, it helped me kind of understand them a little bit better when I was able to break them down between the two primary families. Now, I'm sure there's some umbrella pine people saying, "Hey, what about the Cyanopidaceae or the Araucariaceae families?" So not every conifer will fall into these two families, but the vast majority of them do. The Cupressaceae, the cypress family, typically with scale-like foliage. You can see here on the Heba arborvitae, so think like a fish scale, flattened, overlapping scales. And a lot of times with beautiful markings on the back side, you can see what we call this stomatal banding. And that is usually these very beautiful white markings on the undersides of the scale. And they make for great identification characteristics. But a lot of plants in the Cupressaceae have been selected for retaining their juvenile foliage, which is needle-like. We call that acicular foliage or all-shaped foliage. And you can see here on the boulevard cypress, if we were to zoom in, it wouldn't be overlapping scales, but actually protruding needles, sharp needles, all-shaped needles. And typically within Cupressaceae, you're going to have smaller, rounder cones. And some of the genera that make up Cupressaceae are include like the common arborvitae, juniper, false cypress, the true cypresses, Cupressus, and the deciduous bald cypress, Taxodium. And then, of course, there's the Pinaceae family, pine family, and they have the needles, distinct, elongated linear leaves that we know of as needles. And usually they're held singly on the stem, but they may be held in clusters when it comes to the pines, and we call those fascicles. They typically have larger seed cones and pollen cones. And some of the genera that make up the Pinaceae are the spruce, Picea, of course, pine, fir, the true cedars, and hemlock. Conifers make up some of the largest organisms on Earth and certainly the largest trees, especially those that are native to the west coast of the United States. You can see here, this is a picture I took in Eugene, Oregon. And these are large Douglas firs, probably topping out at close to 100 feet tall, lining a street. And we're certainly not going to see that on the East Coast. Unfortunately, our climate really doesn't allow for that. But certainly, if you go out to the West Coast, you'll see lots of Douglas fir. The giant sequoia, Sequoia dendron giganteum. And this is actually a tree in the picture. This is a tree at Blythewald Mansion Gardens and Arboretum in Bristol. It's the state champion giant sequoia. Um, so that is definitely a tree you don't want to miss. You definitely want to go and visit that plant. We can grow them in the Northeast. They are a little bit fickle. But it's always interesting to think that even a tree like this that's probably 130 years old is still in its infancy because these plants can live for thousands of years. Um, and of course, the coastal redwood, Sequoia sempervirens. A lot of people confuse the giant sequoia and the coastal redwood being native to the fog belt of California and is the tallest tree on Earth at reaching heights of over 350 feet tall, whereas the giant sequoia is the largest tree on Earth by mass. Um, and I believe it will achieve the largest trunk size. But certainly coastal redwood will, grow to have a massive trunk. This is a picture I took of my buddy walking by a large specimen in the Jedediah Smith State Park, just outside Crescent City, California. And he is not a large human being, but this tree certainly makes him look quite small. So now I want to talk about some of the signature conifers around Newport that you can all go and visit. And Newport is a great place to grow conifers. The climate, the soil, they culture really well for us in town. So there's a lot of great plants, and I'm sure there's some of them that you might know of that I'm not going to cover today. But these are some of my favorites. And certainly one of my favorites is the Irish yew or the upright English yew, Taxus baccata vestigiata. And this is a tree that you can find all over town. Some of the bigger specimens are an island cemetery where I believe there's 13 or 14 individuals. And also at Chateau-sur-Mer, there's a number of large trees. And I would imagine the trees pictured are probably approaching 100 years old, if not more. You don't really see, specimen Irish yews in New England all that often. They are a little bit tender, but in Newport, obviously, they're safe and have been safe for a long time. They were certainly a little bit susceptible to snow damage. These stiff, upright trees may splay out under heavy snow, as we saw in the last major event. But I didn't see much breakage, which of course is always good. The Arizona cypress, Hesperocypress arizonica, formerly Cupressus arizonica, on Gibbs Avenue. And I've always been curious for a long time when I was starting to learn my trees that if we could grow Arizona cypress in Rhode Island. And I found out very quickly when I started working down in Newport that we certainly could. And one of the finest trees is on Gibbs Avenue. It's probably approaching 20 feet tall with this beautiful glaucous, bloomy foliage and these awesome cones. And when I say glaucous, I mean kind of covered in a white waxy bloom. So something that's glaucous is going to be kind of silvery in color, silvery bluish in color. So that word comes up a lot when describing conifers. And this is a tree that's going to want a more mild climate, obviously well-drained soil, but appears to be perfectly cold hardy. Although I will say that we did come across the Modoc cypress, Hesperocypress bakeri today at the Arnold Arboretum. So I do think that this tree on Gibbs Avenue may need another look for absolute identification. Who doesn't love a beautiful contorted juniper? I certainly do. And two of the more popular cultivars are Robusta green and what we call the Hollywood juniper, Kaizuka. And these are plants that grow really well in exposed areas. They thrive with neglect. They do really well in coastal climates. Robusta green is a little bit more dense and upright. It produces a lot of cones and usually has kind of more of the sage green color, whereas Kaizuka is more open and has a lighter green color. Doesn't produce quite as many cones, but both of these plants I love. It's a formal appearance, but it's also kind of exotic and interesting. So I would definitely recommend Robusta green or Kaizuka for a difficult location in Newport. The weeping eastern hemlock, Tsuga canadensis pendula. This is a cultivar that was discovered in the Hudson Valley in the late 19th century, was propagated and has become very popular over time. It was certainly a status symbol in the early 20th century. It was hard to find a large estate that was trying to achieve horticultural perfection that didn't have a specimen weeping hemlock. The tree at Chateau-sur-Mer is the co-state champion. I haven't gotten out to measure it yet. I want to. Um, it's a beautiful tree. It's not super tall, but it has a very wide spread. And you can see here in the top left, amazing branching framework, certainly like the dream jungle gym for a child. Um, but unfortunately, we're not allowed to climb on the trees at Chateau-sur-Mer, so I would discourage against that. And the Kingscote tree is very dense grower, needles all the way to the ground, perfectly rounded. So that's kind of another specimen that I think is going to be the kind of the up and coming state champion. And I will say that the weeping hemlock is more resistant to hemlock woolly adelgid than the species is, which is a good thing. But they are certainly, they're not immune. They're tolerant, but not immune. Hinoki false cypress, Chamaecyparis obtusa, Nana gracilis. Now, this tree at Bonnycrest was certainly planted and was intended to be a dwarf tree. And I believe we have pictures. Morgan will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we do have a picture. This tree was a part of the original Olmsted planting. And it certainly, I don't think, I'm sure Olmsted was a visionary person who imagined the landscape far beyond what the current time was. But this is a technical dwarf, Nana gracilis, and you can tell by the ratio, the size of the trunk to the crown of the plant. And this individual at Bonnycrest is just such a beautiful one. It's got such a nice, perfect, rounded habit, very densely foliated, and just this big trunk with a beautiful peeling bark. And this is the only tree that I'm going to list that you can't actually visit and go and actually touch the plant, but you certainly can witness it out on a boat in the bay. And we took cuttings of this tree this fall, or actually just a few weeks ago, so hoping to be able to clone this tree and root it and offer it in the future as a part of our planting programs. Another hinoki, this is the golden hinoki false cypress, Chamaecyparis obtusa aurea, and this is an old cultivar in an island cemetery. This is a great plant to go and visit at golden hour. When the sun hits that yellow foliage, it really brightens up the surrounding area. And a lot of these hinoki cultivars, they don't actually produce a lot of cones, especially the dwarf cultivars. They don't really produce a lot of cones, but aurea will, and it produces them in these clusters, and they're just so interesting. Kind of these perfect globose volleyballs on the tree. So I always am very amused by the cones of the hinoki false cypress. Japanese black pine, Pinus thunbergii, is kind of a Newport classic. It certainly was more abundant in Newport years ago than it is now. This tree has been devastated by our native insect, the turpentine beetle, which serves as a control for this tree. There's a number of beautiful specimens around town. The tree at Braga Park has a beautiful kind of these curving branches and kind of that signature curving trunk. And again, a tree that is going to do really well in exposed locations by the ocean. I will say the Japanese black pines, out of all of the conifers that I've been looking at after this last snowstorm, they probably fared the worst. The low spreading branches, when that heavy snow piled up on them, a lot of trees suffered significant breakage. So that's unfortunate. But you can still see lots of beautiful Japanese black pine around town. They really are interesting trees. The Japanese white pine, Pinus parviflora. This tree in Queen Anne Square is one of
Where's
my
one of my
favorites. Very similar in habit to the Japanese black pine, kind of these layered branching. It's not going to grow to be the biggest tree, but the tree in Queen Anne Square is pretty good size, maybe 25 feet tall, and it's always loaded with cones. It's a great way to identify the Japanese white pine is that this year's cones will be on the branches, last year's cones, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So this plant is always loaded up with cones, and it's got beautiful bluish green foliage. So again, another plant that probably didn't fare all that well in the snowstorm. I can't speak for this tree individually, but as a species, probably not a tree that would fare all that well in heavy, wet snow. Um, but a beautiful plant nonetheless. The Dawn Redwood, Metasequoia glyptostroboides. This tree has a fantastic story. And if you need a fast-growing conifer, this is your plant. This is the kind of tree that will grow 4, 5, even 6 feet in a growing season. The tree pictured in the middle in Eisenhower Park in the center of town was planted by Scott Wheeler. And Scott's only been the city forester for 30 some odd years. So it's awesome for him to look up at a 60-foot tall tree and say, yeah, I planted that. That's awesome. So if you're looking for a fast-growing tree that's going to make a statement quickly, this is your tree. It is a deciduous conifer, beautiful, soft, fern-like foliage, round cones. And I think the best thing about Metasequoia is going to be your bark, kind of this nice orange color, and the way that the trunk gets quite large and kind of has a fluted, flexed nature about it. And of course, beautiful fall color as well. This picture on the left was taken in, I believe, early December. And I think most of the leaves had dropped at that point, but this tree really peaks in fall color late November, early December. Maidenhair tree, the ginkgo biloba. Ginkgos classify as a conifer, a broadleaf deciduous conifer. And there's a number of beautiful ginkgos around town. The tree in Rovinsky Park consistently has this bicolored fall color. When the process of senescence starts, you're going to get yellow on the outside of the fan-shaped leaves, eventually working its way in towards the base. And of course, that creates this wonderful bicolored effect. And the tree in the Truro Jewish Cemetery with these powerful upright branches, consistent yellow fall color. There's a lot of beautiful ginkgos out there. So, of course, I had to include it in my presentation today. The cedar of Lebanon, Cedrus libani variety stenocoma. So this tree is not the most grand conifer, but it's interesting to me because I have a story relating to it. I originally identified this tree as the deodar cedar because the needles were quite long and that perpendicular branching. That's that prominent central trunk and kind of the very perfect perpendicular arms that come off. Um, so I identified it originally as the deodar cedar, and I featured it for our tree of the week. And I was very excited about this. Someone actually commented, the person who planted it, his name is Ralph, and he commented on the post and said that no, no, this is not the deodar cedar. This is in fact a cedar of Lebanon, and it came as the variety Stenocoma, which is a hardy variety from Turkey. And I thought that was really interesting. And he told me that he had received the plant from a famous New Bedford nurseryman named Alan Haskell. And this tree was planted in 1996. And apparently, the trees that Alan received came from the Arnold Arboretum. And of course, that's, very exciting because then I thought, well, maybe this plant could be from wild collected seed, or it could be a clone from a tree that was wild collected from the Arboretum. Now, I'm not sure if the nomenclature, the varietal form stenocoma still holds up because on the Arnold Arboretum plant search, there is no variety stenocoma listed in their collections. So I thought that was interesting. So certainly more to come from this. I'm going to do a little digging at some point. And then, of course, on the right, you can see the sapsucker holes. And if you got a cedar of Lebanon or really any cedrus that doesn't have sapsucker holes in it, so woodpeckers, that's going to be an oddity for sure. So the great tree to visit on Ward Avenue. Love the branching. It's definitely important to note, obviously, Aquidneck, not only Rhode Island, but specifically Aquidneck Island's horticultural history. You know, many nurseries have been around for a long time on Aquidneck Island, and several conifer cultivars have been introduced from these nurseries, probably most famously the Boulevard Falls Cypress from Boulevard Nurseries, which I believe was selected in the 1930s. The Compact U from Rhode Island Nurseries, Taxus ex media densiformis, one of the more popular hedging U's. And then, of course, the Hillary Shore juniper from Van Hoff Nursery, Juniperus conferta Hillary, as well, a trailing ground cover. So now I want to shift over to this is where the craziness really begins. So I want to show off some beautiful conifers that I've experienced in my time as a horticulturist, not only for inspiration, hopefully I can inspire you to plant some of these trees in your gardens, but also just to give you enjoyment on this beautiful March evening. So let's get right into it. We're going to move a little bit quick, but that's okay. We have to. We've got a lot to get through. So I want to start off by talking about the lacebark pine, Pinus bungiana. And a lot of people think of pines as having rough, scaly bark. Not all of them do. The lacebark pine has smooth, multicolored, like a camouflage of colors, greens, chromes, oranges, um, tans, and it is usually trained as a single stem plant. But the more trees I look at, this species certainly wants to be a multi-stemmed tree, which isn't good when the tree is young because, of course, you have those low branches that block the beautiful bark characteristic. But give it time and a little bit of pruning, and eventually you're going to have this beautiful low branch multi-stem plant like this one that I witnessed this past summer. Absolutely spectacular. I couldn't get enough of it. But single stem is good as well. So Pinus bungiana, the lace bark pine, perfectly hardy, grows well in Newport, and it should be more common, native to Asia. Dragon's eye pine, and this is a cultivar of the Japanese red pine, and this one's pretty popular in cultivation. I love the cultivar name Oculus draconis, dragon's eye. And this is a slow growing pine with these prominent yellow bands in the needles. It really is a stunner. Works really well with a dark backdrop. I was walking around a few days ago in my neighborhood in Providence. I saw this plant just absolutely glowing in someone's front yard. So if you do like yellow foliaged plants, this is a great one to go with. I would think probably around 30, 35 feet tall, kind of an upright habit, curved trunk, and beautiful peeling, scaly, but smooth bark, kind of a beautiful reddish orange color. So this is certainly a great four-season tree, slow growing, but definitely if you're into plants that are very bright, this is certainly a good plant to go with. The dragon's eye Japanese red pine. Another pine with interesting bark characteristic is Pinus sylvestris, the Scotch pine, and this has a massive distribution from, I believe, Scandinavia down through all of Europe and all the way, I believe, to like the Himalayan region. So it's got this very massive distribution. And what's interesting is when we grow it in the Northeast, it tends to have kind of an irregular contorted shape to it. But if you go witness it in Scandinavia, it's as straight as a telephone pole. It's really quite fascinating. It's a two-needle pine. It does suffer from like two-needle pine blight and other maladies. But given the proper site, full sun, well-drained soil, it'll perform well for you. And again, it's easily identified by its orange-red bark. And if you limit up properly, the photo on the right is a dwarf cultivar, uh, but real almost like a paperbark maple effect in the landscape. Really beautiful. Love the Pinus sylvestris Scotch pine. So from pines, let's go to Japanese cedars, Cryptomeria japonica. And we looked at some Japanese cedars today at the Arnold Arboretum. And one of the more popular cultivars in the landscape is Globosa nana. So small globe. And this is a popular plant for like foundations, along walkways, in the garden. But it's a tale as old as time. They tell you, this plant might be listed at what, 4 or 5 feet in the nursery, 4 or 5 feet tall, 4 or 5 feet wide. But being a dwarf as a conifer is only temporary because eventually, with time, these plants will continue to grow and grow, um, and certainly will outgrow their listed size in the landscape. And you can see here, this is a plant at the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C., probably around 12 feet tall and 20 feet wide. So if you're thinking of planting Globosa nana as a foundation plant, maybe think again. You could prune it to maintain size. I know Japanese cedar is doesn't take to pruning all that well, but certainly if you pruned it strategically, you could maintain it at the proper size. But certainly a lovable conifer. It's definitely important to note that Japanese cedars cryptomeria does have a winter color. In the summertime, it'll be a nice bright green, but depending on the cultivar, in the wintertime, it may be bronze, brown, maybe more of a yellowish tone. And you can see that on the picture on the left versus the picture on the right. So on the right, that's the summer. On the left, that's the wintertime. We'll stick with Japanese cedar, and one of the more interesting cultivars is one called cristata. And this is a plant that has a stable mutation that we call fasciation. And fasciation is a mutation that will occur on a number of different types of plants. It's when the growth becomes fused and flattened. And it's not always stable, but it certainly is interesting to look at. And cristata will grow to be a large tree, 30, 40 feet tall. And it really isn't the best looking tree from far away, but up close, when you look at this fasciated growth, it really is quite interesting. So that's definitely a cultivar of note. And then also the whipcord cedar, Cryptomeria japonica aerokaryoides. And this is interesting for its elongated growth that almost looks like a whip. Wide internodes. I will tell you that this plant, which is pictured, was topped. So I'm guessing this will be kind of a rounded or pyramidal shaped tree, 30, 40 feet tall, over many years. This plant was topped. That's why it appears wider than it is tall. And the winter color is going to be kind of a yellow. Um, so certainly an interesting plant. I've seen it grown in a container. I'm sure it's not going to be happy in a container for long, but certainly an oddity. So these two I would classify as oddities, cristata and Aerokaryoides. Sticking with Cryptomeria japonica, let's talk about elegans. And this, I think you could, will be classified as a dwarf plant. If it's sold in a nursery in the Northeast, which is not that popular in the Northeast, you're going to see this plant a lot more in Europe, the West Coast of the United States. Beautiful foliage. So Cryptomeria typically does have kind of all-shaped, needle-like foliage, soft and spongy to the touch. And elegans, kind of the space between the needles widens. They kind of flare out more, and it really creates a wonderful texture in the landscape. Color this during the growing season is going to be dark bluish green, but in the wintertime, it's going to take on kind of a brick red color, especially on the side that's more exposed to wind and sun. And when you go to Europe or you go to the West Coast, and you'll see Cryptomeria japonica elegans reaching 20, 30 feet tall. It's perfectly hardy, although it doesn't look it. I always thought it kind of has the look of like an aquatic plant, the way the foliage appears. It's certainly a great texture plant for season interest and doesn't really develop kind of a central leader. It kind of has more of a spreading shape to it, maybe a couple codominant trunks. So probably want to strategically prune this plant into the shape you want it. Let's talk about a deciduous conifer, golden larch, Pseudolarix amabilis. So golden larch, we also call this plant the false larch. And we saw some beautiful specimens today at the Arnold Arboretum. This tree can easily achieve 50, 60 feet in height. And I think they're most beautiful when the leaves first emerge. Old plants will develop these interesting spurs, kind of these lateral shoots, these worm-like spurs. And when the needles first emerge in their whorls, they kind of have this beautiful soft green color. It's almost like this bright green flower, and it's really interesting close up. And on the left, you'll see the cones, which is a great way to separate it from a true larch, the Lyric species, in that the cone scales are kind of more solid, smooth, and pointed, and maybe a little bit larger as well. And then beautiful orange fall color. And again, with a lot of the deciduous conifers, they do color late in the season. This is probably going to peak, mid-November. Let's talk about another deciduous conifer. This is Taxodium disticum, the southeast native, from Delaware down to South Florida, west to Texas, the bald cypress, and a very well-known tree, known for growing in swampy conditions with its fluted trunk and those knees that protrude above the ground to stabilize the tree and give the root system oxygen. Um, and a lot of people think, oh, bald cypress, it grows native in swamps. It's going to want to be in moist conditions, moist soils, poor drainage. And that's in fact not true. This is a plant that once it gets established, it will survive in very dry soils. This plant in the middle here was a large, probably 50-foot tree at Kew Gardens. And in 2022, England had one of their hottest and driest summers on record. And I believe like 1.3 million people visit Kew Gardens every year. So if you look at the ground this tree's growing out of, it's compacted, it's dry. But that was probably the greenest tree in the Arboretum at Kew Gardens. It was absolutely fantastic. So once established, Taxodium disticum will certainly tolerate drought, compaction. You just need to give it a little time as it's getting its root system in place. And again, with a lot of these deciduous conifers, beautiful fall color, kind of that Texas Longhorn burnt orange, usually in early November, and beautiful globose cones. Port Orford cedar, but as we're going to call it, Port Orford false cypress, Chamaecyparis lawsoniana, is native to a small portion of southern Oregon, and I've had the pleasure of actually seeing this tree in the wild outside Port Orford. And despite being native to such a small area, it is an incredibly diverse tree, lots of different growth habits, colors. It does get to be quite large and is really happy in an area with a cool summer and a more mild winter. It definitely wants to dry out in the summertime and really does want to be in well-drained soil. So it does really well in Europe. This tree, with the dark bluish green foliage, this is a tree I saw in Norway at the Oslo Botanical Garden. And here is a green foliaged form in the Swiss Alps. And again, these get to be large trees, narrow shape to them. Beautiful specimen conifers, a little bit thicker, a little bit fickle under cultivation in Rhode Island. They're perfectly hardy, but I think it really is, kind of the moisture in the soil that presents problems. It's susceptible to Phytophthora root rot, but I believe it was Oregon State University did develop a rootstock, a root rot resistant rootstock that has made the plant viable again. So if you are looking to purchase Port Orford cedar, if you want to give it a try, be sure that it's grafted onto resistant rootstock. And the tree pictured in the middle is at URI's East Farm. And I know Brian Maynard was growing a number of interesting Port Orford cedars there. So certainly a tree that's worth a try. I don't know if they're going to achieve the noble status they would in Europe or on the West Coast, but certainly a great specimen conifer. Talk about a couple spruces. One of my favorite spruces is the Serbian spruce, Picea america. And it's not as common as the Colorado blue spruce or the Norway spruce, But I think it's probably a little bit more disease resistant. You see a lot of especially the Colorado blue spruce is suffering from canker and needle cast. Serbian spruce will be more tolerant of that. And I love it. It's got a narrow form to it and these kind of skirting branches that flare upright and show off the stomatal banding on the undersides of their needles. It's a great way to identify the tree. And this is the kind of plant that would make a great border or screen, perfectly hardy and relatively available in commerce. So this is if I'm recommending spruce to somebody for their garden, it's certainly going to be Serbian spruce, Picea america. And then one of my favorite trees, individual trees, is the weeping Norway spruce at in the on the Butler campus here in Providence, Picea abies pendula. Now, this is a common tree in cultivation. It wants to be a creeping ground cover. It needs staking in order to develop a central leader. Now, I look at this large tree that's probably 30, 40 feet tall, and I'm a little bit confused on how it has achieved such a height. I'm wondering if some of these conifers, if trained properly, will kind of eventually develop a central leader and gain height on their own accord. But they're certainly graceful plants. Um, but they are not stagnant. They will continue to grow. You do see a lot of weeping spruces planted in places where I'm like, that tree is going to outgrow that space in 5, 10 years time. So be sure to give it a lot of space. Couple more spruces. The oriental spruce, Picea orientalis. And this tree is at Salve Regina. And what's great about, we talk about friendly firs and spiny spruces, and this is a friendly spruce. It's got these adorable little soft needles. It's pleasant to the touch. And unlike the Colorado blue spruce or perhaps the Norway spruce, as it ages, it doesn't really thin out and open up as much. It really stays tight and dense, kind of a narrow cylindrical form and is touted as being more disease resistant, but the mature trees that I've seen in Newport especially, do have a branch dieback that is common. And I'm not exactly sure what causes it. It's nothing totally devastating to the plant, but it is there. And then Skylands spruce is a cultivar, a yellow foliaged form of oriental spruce. Probably not going to achieve the same size. Usually, yellow foliage plants do not achieve the same size as the species forms. Skylands has a wonderful texture. It's readily available, and I would imagine probably no more than 40 feet tall over many years. But it's a good plant for the garden, a good collector's item, and a good specimen. Let's talk furs. If I had to recommend one fir for the landscape, it would certainly be the Caucasian fir, native to the Caucasus, of course, Abies nordmandiana. And this is a plant that I see every time I see it. It's happy as can be, very full, beautiful, dark green needles, pyramidal shape. So this, I think, is probably, if you're going to grow a fir, and why not grow a fir? There's lots of spruces out there. There aren't as many firs. Grow more firs for sure. And I would certainly recommend this species for success in the landscape. And this is a tree at Swan Point Cemetery here in Providence. Another fir, the grand fir, and this is one that I am not sure I have ever seen in the northeast of New England. I meant to check the Arnold Arboretum accessions to see if they're growing a tree. I'm not sure if they are, but I think it's one that's worth a try for the collector. Beautiful blue-green foliage, and you can see again very nice, dense pyramidal habit. And the trees I saw when I was in Europe were massive, and I know from reading that this tree will grow to be well over 100 feet tall in its native haunts in the western United States at high elevation. And a common fir, probably the most common fir that we grow here in Rhode Island, the white fir, Abies concolor, and beautiful silver blue foliage. I do see dieback a lot on. I do see it more and more on the concolor fir or the white fir, and I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure what causes it. I know this is a tree that does not like poorly drained soils, probably doesn't like the humidity of our summers, but it certainly can withstand the heat and the cold. So if you are going to grow white fir, be sure to give it really sharply draining soil, plenty of sunlight, and good airflow. Blue Atlas cedar. And I know the nomenclature around this plant has switched recently. Now it's being included in with the cedar of Lebanon, Cedrus libani, as a subspecies. And then the glaucous form, glauca, is most common in cultivation. You can see here a large tree, beautiful blue foliage, will, kind of upright in youth, eventually flattening out over time, 40, 50 feet tall, 40, 50 feet wide. Again, another tree native to the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. So a tree that's going to want lots of sun, good drainage, but does seem to perform really well, especially in Newport. And here's a closer look at the foliage and the cones. The cones are like a fir tree. The cones are held upright on the branches, and when it's time to release the seeds, it doesn't split open and drop the seeds out. The cone actually just disintegrates right off the plant. And if you have enough cones on your tree, like we saw today at the Arnold Arboretum, it actually will disintegrate away and create this beautiful mulch of cone scales underneath the tree. Um, so the tree actually kind of just mulches itself, which is awesome. And then one of the cultivars, Glauca vestigiata, maybe not quite as glaucous or blue as Glauca, the standard cultivar, but it has a wonderful upright habit. And this tree at ex Wilcox Park in Westerly was expertly placed in between these two windows. Probably will stay a third as wide as it is tall. And this is relatively popular in commerce. So that's a tree that's available. And one of my favorites, Glauca vestigiana. I love a nice spiky conifer. I think they provide, have a wonderful texture in the landscape and provide lots of interest. And what better spikes than on that of a juniper? Plumosa aurea is a Pfitzer type with nice kind of yellow-green summer foliage. Very spiky, spreading habit, probably 10 feet tall and 20 feet wide. Hetzai is a classic. It's been around a long time. Easy to root from cuttings. Will get quite large, 20 feet tall, probably 20, 30 feet wide. Beautiful blue-green scale foliage. Takes to pruning really well. I've seen it pruned and hedged really nicely. And also limbed up too to create a wonderful kind of, you can go underneath the tree and see the beautiful bark. And so Hetzai is a common one. And then one of my favorites I saw when I was at the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. was one called Gold Rider. And this is not a juniper. This is a Leyland cypress, so Cupressus ex Leylandii. And Gold Rider is probably going to be a little bit smaller than your typical Leyland cypress, maybe maturing to 30, 40 feet tall. And it was selected for its golden yellow color at the end of the branching. And I've read that in warmer, sunnier climates, the color does fade away through the heat of the summer. But I would imagine this one would be just beautiful in Newport. It's probably got a more dense habit than typical Leyland cypress. When I was observing this tree in the Gatelli collection down there, I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, what a handsome conifer. And I wanted to take cuttings right then and there. So I do know of one in Rhode Island, and I don't know whose tree it actually is, but I'm very much interested in propagating this tree, and making it available to people in Newport. Really a beautiful, beautiful conifer, and it's got a great spiky nature about it. Nootka Alaskan cypress, Cupressus nootkatensis. I believe that nomenclature is incorrect now. I believe it's now Calotropis nootkatensis, native from southern Alaska down to, I believe, northern Oregon. And in cultivation, it's usually found in its pendulous form. So you can see the tree on the far left is like your standard pendula, kind of an upright shape, eventually broadening in time, and the secondary growth kind of weeps down, dark green needles. And then Glauca pendula in the middle is a little bit more open, more contorted, a little bit more free form in shape, kind of a similar color to it. Over time, it will fill out more and look more like pendula, but especially when it's young, it's going to be really contorted like those contorted junipers we saw earlier. And then, of course, the classic strict weeping. So if you're looking for an oddity, if you're looking for a conifer that is going to fit into a thin space, strict weeping might be a good pick for you. Again, nice dark green needles, kind of looks like a ghost making its way across the landscape. Very pendulous growth habit. It will fill out with time, but I believe in Rhode Island, it's going to be a long time before it really fills out. So, um, a good plant for an area where space is limited. Strict weeping. All right, let's go. We're getting there. A few weeping trees I want to talk about. Weeping white pine, Pinus strobus pendula. This is a great native tree, perfectly adapted to grow in our climate. Will develop a central leader on its own, so it will put on height. You don't really need to do a whole lot of staking or pruning to get this tree um, to have a nice, graceful, natural, flowing shape to it. Will get quite large. I would say over 30 feet, maybe even over 40 feet tall over many years. And will produce an abundance of cones, which is always nice. Like I said earlier, some of these conifer cultivars, they don't always produce cones. So it's always good when you can get some cone production. And then another classic, and look at this monstrosity, weeping blue Atlas cedar, um, Glauca pendula. And this is a plant, I would imagine the plant in the photograph was pictured at some, was staked and trained at some point in order to get the spreading habit and the height on those branches. Beautiful blue coloration to the needles. Doesn't produce a whole lot of cones, but will get large. And I would imagine this is an old plant, but if when it's happy, it will grow quickly. And really, I've seen a lot of people train and prune them to desired shapes. I've seen, a lot of the nurserymen have trained, S curves into the trunks, and I've seen all kinds of odd things. But I kind of like the natural spreading look of almost like a spider making its way, an arachnid crawling across the landscape. Taxodium disticum, Cascade Fall. So a couple more weepers. So this is a bald cypress cultivar. So again, this will lose its leaves, but the great thing about this plant is it's got a very nice pendulous habit about it. So it's not going to have a coarse texture in the winter landscape. Nice fall color, and it does need help to train it upward. So you can see the owners of this tree have kind of had this ingenious staking technique that they've used to add some height onto their plant. Because a lot of these weeping conifers, they just want to crawl along the ground. So they need our help to train them upwards to really get that nice weeping effect. And this one, I mean, my mind just goes to the world of Dr. Seuss. You want to talk about crazy conifers. And this is certainly one. This was at a botanical garden in Germany, and this is the weeping giant sequoia. So what you're looking at here on the right is where the trunk is, and the tree has been trained up and over. Get my cursor. So the trunk is here, and it's been trained up to curve over. And most of the growth is hanging downward, but also it will send out these shoots that go upward as well. So I just think of like a camel in the Dr. Seuss universe with many humps, such an oddity. And I have seen it in Rhode Island, small trees, a lot of potential. So that's one to try, certainly. Swamp Fall cypress, Chamaecyparis thioides, also known as the Atlantic white cedar, commonly mistaken for our eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana. Kind of has a similar look to it, but can be identified with its nice woody globose cones. And this is a special conifer, well, one, because it's native, and also because it is very well adapted to moist, swampy conditions. So I think it has landscape value simply for that. And when I went to the U.S. National Arboretum in their conifer collection, I came across this plant, Chamaecyparis thioides rubicon, or red star. And I loved this plant right away. I loved the texture. I loved up close. I loved the all shaped scales and the color of the plant itself. And it immediately reminded me of a far more common conifer cultivar that we all know, but not all of us love, um, dwarf Alberta spruce, which everyone and their mother seems to grow. Um, and I thought, wouldn't Chamaecyparis thyoides make a fantastic replacement for dwarf Alberta spruce? It certainly would be more adaptable to the heat and almost certainly more adaptable to poorly drained soils, and I would imagine even more adapted to shady spots. So, and easy to propagate, I'm sure, from cutting. So, I don't know, maybe in the future, Thyoides rubicon becomes a lot more popular as a replacement for dwarf Alberta spruce. Maybe a little bit bigger. I think Rubicon probably would mature to 25 feet tall over many years. Dwarf Alberta spruce, I don't think I've ever seen one over 20 feet tall. So maybe a little bit larger of a plant, but certainly has that same landscape use. So a few ground covers, Japanese garden juniper, Juniperus procumbens nana is one of the best evergreen ground covers. Thrives with neglect. Here it is, trailing over a stone wall. Russian arborvitae in the bottom left of your screen. Perfectly cold hardy, a great plant for like soil stabilization, um, embankments, probably more shade tolerant than any of the junipers. So if the area is a little bit shaded, this might be a good plant to go with. And it's also important to note that Russian arborvitae does turn bronze brown in the wintertime. So it does have winter coloration to it that is quite different. And just now, I think we're just starting to see on the Russian arborvitaes them start to gain their green color back. So spring is around the corner. Oop. And one more, the blue spider juniper. And this is a great ground cover with blue foliage. And this is one, if you have a difficult location, full sun, poor soils, the junipers are always a good choice in a difficult location. And here's Japanese garden juniper again, at its very, very best in Southern California at the Huntington Botanical Garden and Library in San Marino, California. And they have a wonderful Japanese garden there. And it was awesome to see Juniperus procumbens nana used. I just love it. It's just such an adorable little plant. Makes a nice ground cover, but also kind of mounds up over time to be a small shrub. Nice sage green coloration. And of course, makes a great bonsai as well. And this was a plant at a tortured plant at the Huntington Botanical Garden, and I'm sure a very old one. I didn't get a date on this tree, but I would imagine it's at least 70 years old based on the height of it, but mainly the size of the trunk. And a few miniatures. Now, again, like being a dwarf conifer, being a miniature conifer is a temporary status. But a couple that I like, Aves, Coriana, the Korean fir icebreaker, and the needles kind of curl upwards against the stem, revealing those beautiful stomatal bands in the undersides of the needles. And this is one that I would imagine probably staying under 3 feet tall, 3, 4 feet tall, and 3, 4 feet wide. Um, yeah, it's a good one. Pretty popular in the trade. That's something you could probably pick up at a place like Farmer's Daughter or Sylvan. Well, keep going backwards. And shout out to my friend Annie. This is Mr. Bowling Ball. And what a great name. Very rounded shape to it. Blue-green needles. I actually planted this miniature conifer. And I will say it does grow quickly once it's established. So again, nursery catalogs, textbooks, they lie to you all the time about size. But it does have a wonderful texture to it, wonderful color, and can easily be pruned to maintain size. Mr. Bowling Ball can. So that's a good one as well. And that is a Thuya occidentalis cultivar. So that is Thuya occidentalis, Mr. Bowling Ball. China fir, Cunninghamia lanceolata glauca, and this is one you'll see more in the southeast. It is, I would say, mostly hardy in Rhode Island. and a wonderful blue-green coloration to it. Will be a large tree. This is actually in Washington, D.C. I don't think I've ever seen a plant bigger than like 20, 30 feet tall. In fact, the biggest one I've ever seen is in Newport. Um, and that's about 20 feet tall, but will grow much larger in the under the right conditions. And then up close, of course, beautiful needles. And this is not a friendly plant. This is not one you're going to want to go and shake hands with or give a nice pet to. The needles are quite sharp and you will get poked. So, and a great name, Cunninghamia, I'm sure named after someone named Cunningham, lanceolata for its lance-shaped needles. And finally, of course, the monkey puzzle tree, Araucaria araucana. And this picture is actually taken from a tree in Rhode Island on Aquidneck Island, and I believe it's in Portsmouth, and it's at least 20 feet tall. So this is one we can grow. Difficult to grow. Definitely going to want, even in the warmest parts of the state, it's going to want some protection. But if you treat it right, you will be rewarded. Such an oddity. And here's a close look up at the cones. And this is a really sharp leaf and sharp spiny cones as well. They develop over 2 years. And it's native to South America in Chile, I believe, in the mountains of Chile. So it's listed as being hardy to about 0 degrees. So take that for what you will. Um, but give it protection, make sure it's in well-drained soil, treat it right, and you've got a chance. On the West Coast and in Europe, there's 50, 60-foot trees. So it's got a lot of potential. And just such an interesting foliage characteristic. It almost looks like the plant's branches are rotating around itself, the way the foliage is arranged. It's really quite interesting. Big fan of the monkey puzzle. Really makes a bold statement in the garden. All right, so that was some conifer craziness. Now I want to quickly go over some tips for growing conifers. I'm sure we'll have some cultural questions in the chat. But here are a few quick tips. Most conifers would much prefer to be in full sun. I see a lot of times struggling conifers sited in full shade. There are very few conifers that would prefer shade. I don't really know of any that would prefer shade over sun. So make sure if you are going to grow conifers, make sure they get lots of sunshine, at least 6 hours of sunshine a day. And drainage is incredibly important. You want a nice, well-drained, loamy soil. You hear a lot of people who are conifer collectors that they amend their soil with gravel and actually plant their trees on top of gravels to make sure that there's great drainage. So even if you can plant your trees up a little high, mound them up a little bit, or just make sure that the soil is going to be well drained, that's incredibly important for most conifer species. Airflow is key. You don't want to have these plants up against two walls and large trees and other shrubs. You want to give them ideally a little bit of space where air can flow around the plant. If you have stagnant air, that's when disease starts to spread. So make sure you give good airflow. Protect from mammals. We all know about deer. We all know about rabbits. They can be incredibly devastating and damage our conifers. If you're going to plant a small conifer under 4 or 5 feet tall, be sure to protect it, especially if it's like arborvitae, Thuja occidentalis, or like a green giant arborvitae. If you're going to plant a small plant, the deer love the arborvitaes, so be sure to protect it. Um, Watch out for reversions, especially on like the dwarf Alberta spruce and the dwarf hinoki cultivars. You're going to want to catch your reversions early, and you can see here in the top right, that is dwarf Alberta spruce reverting back to the species form. And Picea glauca, white spruce, it wants to be a massive tree. So that is what this reversion will do. So if you don't spot it quickly, it will grow and grow and grow. And if you remove it too late, you can have a massive hole in your plant. So be sure you get to it early and remove it. Do not prune below growth. And I see this so many times. If you cut back a conifer,
Beyond the
you're not
green.
going to have Epicormic buds come from the stems. If you cut it too far back, it's not going to produce any growth. And so many times I've seen plants cut back hard and they end up just creating a massive hole in their plant because no growth is going to come from these stems. So be sure if you cut back, now there are some exceptions, taxus being one of them they use, but you be sure if you're cutting back that there is green growth visible. Either cut to a branch that branches off with growth. If you cut back to bare stems, you're not going to get any growth from those stems. And then obviously be mindful of heavy snow. We can get heavy snow in this area, as we know from the last weather event, and a lot of damage occurred. We saw a lot of damage on, like I said, Japanese black pines, but also arborvitaes as well, some of the upright arborvitae forms. This is Holmstrup, and Holmstrup was probably the cultivar arborvitae that I saw the most damage on. Now, if the branch doesn't break, but simply bends or maybe tears slightly, you can take that branch, put it back into place, and tie it up. And once growth resumes through the summer and then in the fall, and that stem expands and hardens, it's going to solidify back into place. So if your conifers are looking splayed out right now, you can put them back into place, tie them up, and they will solidify. And then, of course, the 3 Ds of pruning. Be sure to remove dead, damaged, and diseased branches, of course. And then cutting propagation. I just want to talk quickly about some of the propagation work we've done at the Tree Conservancy, particularly with the Cupressaceae family. So things like arborvitaes, junipers, false cypresses, true cypresses. And a lot of these plants are very easy to root from hardwood cuttings. We take our cuttings in January, February, after they get a nice hard freeze. We make sure they're kept cool until it's time to stick them. We process the cuttings down. You do want to have a little bit of woody stem at the base of your cutting. So we'll process the cuttings down. We'll strip the lower needles or leaves. We'll give them a nice wound. We'll dip them in some hormone talc powder. And we did a little experiment last year, I believe, on which media was going to be the best for rooting. So you can see here we have pots that are filled with sharp sand and a perlite mix, and also in a peat moss perlite mix as well. And it turns out that the sand perlite mix was a lot better for rooting. So now this year we went exclusively with a perlite sand mix. And we root our conifers in our cold frame in a poly tent. And this is something, if you are interested in conifer propagation, this is something you can do at home on a smaller scale. Just make sure you get some clear plastic, something that's going to maintain humidity. And you can build your own little tent. We mist our cuttings 1 to 2 times a day on a sunny day. They like to be kept cool. We shade them with a little bit of burlap, but we definitely like to they need light to root. So we try to give them as much light as possible without the media or the plants drying out too much. And you can see here the incredible diversity of conifers we're trying to root this season in the top left there. So hoping for success. And again, we stick them in February, and by usually mid-April, they're rooted. You can see here a freshly rooted cutting. And then the picture on the left, now that's a cutting. Once it's rooted, you pot it up into an appropriate soil mix, you fertilize it a little bit, you grow it through the season. And then, you can see the beautiful growth there on a juvenile form of Saguaro false cypress that we rooted. So this is something that you can do at home. You just need some soil, maybe some sort of plastic to create your little tent, a pot or pots, and you can do this. Again, these conifers, they want to be in some light, but they want to be kept cool. So if you don't mind, moving them inside, outside, like in your garage would be the perfect place to root them if you can give them artificial light. So if you are interested in conifer propagation, this is something you can do at home. And if you're really interested, get in touch. And we'd be happy to show you what we're doing, give you tips and tricks and some of the information that we've gained doing this the last few years. Where to see conifers? There's a lot of places to see them. Obviously, I mentioned the Arnold Arboretum today. Roger Williams Park and Botanical Garden has a number of beautiful conifers. And the Gatelli collection of dwarf and unusual conifers at the U.S. National Arboretum is a must-see if you're in the area. And of course, I've listed out a bunch of other places. Most botanical institutions have a conifer collection of some sorts. So usually if you're going to a botanical garden or arboretum, you're going to see conifers. And I do want to point out Isley Nursery in Oregon, although I don't know, how open to the public they are. Their conifer collection is so amazing that it's worth looking up on YouTube and just taking a virtual tour on YouTube. So many amazing plants there at Isley Nursery. So, and I believe with that, that is it. I will take your questions. Thank you for bearing with me and the crazy world of conifers. We're living in it. We're loving it.
Thanks, Joe. I think we have some questions in the chat, and also people can feel free to unmute themselves now and ask away.
Give me your best questions. I dare you.
We have someone ask, do many conifers require fire to disperse seeds?
Yes, many do. A lot of these pines, like Pinus ponderosa on the West Coast, it needs the heat of the fire to actually dehiss and dry out that cone to release the seed. Yeah. Things like Pinus contorta, shore pine. A lot of the West Coast pines benefit from fire. Yeah.
Then we also have, is it preferable to have a large production of cones? If so, why?
That's a great question. My observations tell me that if a plant is producing a large amount of cones, the plant is stressed and unhappy. Um, and usually that kind of holds true with a lot of trees. The closer they get and the more stressed out they might be, they know the end might be near and they say, I got to reproduce, I got to reproduce. And then they put their remaining energy into cone production. So typically, if you do see a conifer with a lot of cones, now this isn't always the case because some species just naturally produce a lot of cones. But like hemlock, for example, if hemlock is really struggling, it may put a lot of energy into producing a considerable amount of cones. So not always preferable, not always a sign of a healthy plant.
Okay. Gerlinda, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as my head is spinning.
Good.
I've actually two quick questions. One is I see a lot of these very tall conifers bending down a lot from the wet snow.
Yep.
And they're not broken, but will they eventually come back up? And if so, how would they do that?
May not by themselves. Not by themselves. They may perk up a little bit, but a lot of them, kind of actually the bend was so severe in the stem itself that actually is kind of it's not going to right itself. It actually
Yeah,
needs
it's
to.
the top that I see bending down. It's not so
Yeah.
much the root, it's the top.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of those will need to be righted. Because the snow was so heavy, not the stem doesn't always just break and tear. Sometimes it just might bend and like kind of
Mm.
crunch in on itself. The woody tissue and also the growing tissue. So a lot of these plants that were bent by the heavy snow will need human assistance to right them.
Okay. And the other one, I did try what you showed at the end, the propagation. So I
Mm.
did plant some branches. They dried out. So will there still be, but they're not coming out. So it's not just a stick. There may be a little bit something holding them in the soil. So I didn't unearth them, but do you think something will still come out of it?
Usually, if the leaves have dried up and died, even if if roots were produced before they dried up, obviously there's no way that shoots can be produced. And it's also possible that you may get that resistance because the cutting has produced callus but not roots.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so sometimes like it's a little bulge of undifferentiated tissue, but no roots.
Okay,
So
but
that
it's
could be
go.
what you're feeling.
Do I need to do some new ones?
You may want to try some new ones.
Try again. Okay, thank you. And thanks for the many selections.
Good. Yes.
All right.
Anything else? I know we are a little bit late here.
We have a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to mention mine from the chat
Oh
if
yeah,
that's
go for it, Lisa.
um so as I mentioned earlier, I had the I think it was probably a eastern white pine that got uprooted
Mhm.
with the storm. I have three juniper trees. They're eastern red cedar. Should I plant another one of those? I also have Norway spruce. Like I'm just wondering, should I plant more of what I have? And are there anything that you suggest?
Mm.
It's next to a fence in between my house and my neighbors, so it's somewhat of a screen. Um, so I was just
I
looking.
love Eastern red cedar.
You
It's a
do?
great
Okay.
native conifer.
Okay.
It had a slide in the presentation until it had to be cut out for time purposes.
Oh, okay. I was looking for
So
that.
you can't go wrong with that.
Okay.
But yeah, a lot of conifers make great screens. Obviously, there's a lot of arborvitae cultivars. That Glauca vestigiata cedar would make a great screen. And it's kind of narrow, but it does require a lot of light. Um,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of great screens. There's, dwarf conifers that, maybe not technical dwarfs, but smaller cultivars that would make great screens. But I love the Eastern red cedar. That's a great
Okay.
native plant, does really well here. And if it's in good sunlight, it's going to do well.
Okay. Yeah, since I have three kind of along the same fence, I'm thinking that maybe planting another one of those since they seem to be doing well.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, thanks.
Someone asked, young green giant arborvitae took a beating. I see lots of brown. Will they make it?
Yes. Yes. Green Giant is tough, it's vigorous, it's hardy. I'm pretty confident they will make it. I haven't seen your trees. But I will confidently state that they will make it, yeah.
We also have someone wondering what your professional affiliation is, Joe.
The Newport Tree Conservancy, of course. Um, yeah, I've been the living collections manager for 5 years. I'm a horticulturist, a propagator, a curator, an educator, and of course, above all, a tree lover.
Joe, can you hear me? Am I getting through?
Yes, yes, you are.
Hello, and thank you for a fabulous presentation. Uh, Joe, your thoughts for someone like myself, a conifer collector, homeowner, who would like to do a little selective pruning, shaping on conifers in their landscape, trying to take advantage of a little bit more dormancy left in the growth cycle before we get some real heat. Your thoughts on that?
Now's a good time. Now's a good time. Yeah, I would say the best times to prune conifers are in the wintertime when the trees are dormant, or after growth has stopped, late summer, fall. I think are the two best times to do it. Like I said, don't prune back behind green growth. I always recommend that to promote airflow, it's always good to kind of thin things out and limb things up. Prune dead, diseased, and dying. And make sure that your cuts, you're not flush cutting or anything like that. The tree usually will tell you where to cut it with a little, you'll see your included bark, and then there's usually a little ring. So you definitely want to make sure that your cuts are properly done. And no, I think it's a great time, and I think you see so many conifers in the landscape that could really benefit from some pruning. So I would say
Thank you.
go.
Anyone have any other questions for Joe?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, hi, Joe.
Hey.
So this might be a controversial topic, but
Oh,
can you comment on topping a conifer such as Chamaecyparis green arrow to allow it to be grown in a very small landscape, which consists of 1/10 of an acre?
yeah, I think you could top it. You're probably going to get a response. You're probably going to lose that central leader, and you're probably going to get codominant shoots that emerge. Um, but I think, if done properly, and there really isn't a whole lot of ways to mess that up, especially because Green Arrow, I believe, if I'm thinking of the right plant, is a very narrow cultivar of Weeping Alaskan Cedar. So I think, yeah, I think topping it, you probably are going to get it to be, it's going to be, it will broaden out. It probably is going to send up multiple shoots in place of the shoot that you've removed. But it should take well to it.
Thank you so much, because I've actually already done this.
Okay.
There's just so many people writing about how it's like a crime and awful, and these trees are doing beautifully,
Good.
beautifully. So thank you.
Good. Yeah. I mean, it's your garden. You're free to do what you want. I love to see conifers reach their genetic potential, but if space is limited, and there's always the option of hard cutbacks if done properly.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Interesting, if I may, Joe, comment on that last caller, because she made that pruning that the plant doesn't typically like, introducing more light intensity and heat at that point of the cut.
Hmm.
It sounds like she's caring for her plants very well with irrigation, nutrition, mulching, keeping the stress off of those cuts of those plants. So
Right.
good job on that, and glad
Yeah.
to hear that the plants have responded well to something they don't take kindly to. So um, whatever she's doing it well.
All right, we have another question. Are there any good conifers for small spaces without needing much pruning?
Um, some that come to mind that, obviously the ones included in the presentation, the dwarf hinokis. I think it's a crime to prune a dwarf hinoki. Black dragon cryptomeria, dwarf white pine. Um, there's a dwarf hinoki called cherryman. That's Chirimen. And that's always one that I like to recommend. It will get decently sized over time. And if you do need to prune it, it does take to pruning well. But that's a really nice one for a small space. Like the bird's nest spruce, globosa, Colorado blue spruce. Um, those are all good choices. Mugo pine. There's a lot of miniature mugo pine cultivars. Um, things like that come to mind.
All right, unless anyone has any more questions, or Joe, unless you want to offer up any final words, I think.
One last thing I'll say is if you have a newly planted conifer, and of course it's always good to make sure a newly planted tree doesn't go into drought stress, but do not overwater newly planted conifers. A lot of times I see people, I've planted it, I've got irrigation, I don't know why it's struggling, and a lot of times over irrigation can be a problem. So don't overwater. You still want to let that soil dry out a little bit before you irrigate, even on newly planted trees.
All right, with
Mhm.
that, we just want to say thank you again to everyone for joining us tonight.